All right, everybody, welcome back to Hardpoints, episode 16. That's the podcast about energy security and the startup economy and how they intersect to shape the world around us. Each week, we, as usual, will unpack the real dynamics behind the headlines, what's changing, what it means, and why it matters to you. Thanks for being here. Neil, how was your weekend?
It was good, man. We had a boys' day yesterday, but I actually was in Chicago for the Pat Tillman Foundation meeting that I mentioned last week, and it was really good. We had some players, some coaches, some folks from the Tillman Foundation, and like Tillman sits between sort of military veterans and the NFL, and we had a really good discussion and maybe even a way forward. So it was good. How about you?
I was going to ask you about that way forward part. I didn't realize that there wasn't a path for the Tillman Foundation until today.
Oh, no. I mean, I don't mean the foundation itself. They're going strong. They just awarded a whole new class. So another 42 Tillman scholars came into the universe a few weeks ago. So we're now up to about 1,000 Tillman scholars over the life of the program. It started in 2008 or 9. I came in 2011. No, what I mean is I started this project to explore how, and we talked to Jim Grossman about this on the pod maybe, 2 months ago.
Yeah.
Explore the connections, the similarities between when a veteran gets off of active service and a player gets off of active playing. And that's an Olympian, an NFL player, a WNBA player, high achievers. When they achieve their objective, the best thing they can do for their health is set a new big objective. But so rarely does that happen. And as a result, transition goes poorly for a lot of, we know some of the veteran stories that, veteran homelessness, joblessness, substance abuse, suicide are all big problems. What we're trying to explore with this program is, we have a lot of efforts to triage those problems after they become problems. We don't have a lot of programs or any programs actually to try to help those vets or players or athletes before those problems arise. And so we're trying to explore earlier in somebody's career, could we do something? Could we get them some training before they transition that would help them do better in the transition?
And you think you might have something figured out a little bit there? Anything you're willing to share?
So. Yeah, it's early days. We don't know, but I think one, there's a Columbia University has a Center for Veterans Integration, Transition and Integration. They do curriculum development for veteran service organizations. So they're sort of set up to do the academic work and the curriculum work. We have access to the NFL through the Tillman Foundation. We've got access to parts of the military. So we're going to put together a pitch, and based on the data, we've got some reasons to believe we're going to be successful. We'll go out and see if we can raise some money. If we can raise some money, then we can do the curriculum. Like Columbia is set up to do that. And then we can run a pilot. So I think it took us, several days of, locking ourselves in a room and, again, players, veterans, et cetera, to come to this conclusion, just to have a framework for, this is a startup like you and I work in every day, but now this is a nonprofit startup. And so some of it translated, some of it didn't, but certainly, I think we're going after a worthy cause, and there are some folks that I think will respond to it. So we'll see, but it'll be a couple $1 million we got to put in the bank to get it developed. We'll just see if anybody's got that appetite. If you tie this back to human performance, player performance, this is about the whole player, physically, mentally, emotionally, spiritually, and in the moment, are they going to be a better player? Because, I understand the NFL is focused on winning games. The Marine Corps, as I kept saying over this weekend, the Marine Corps is rightly focused on winning wars. I understand from an organizational, institutional perspective that, we've got to align interests here. The underlying reason for what we're doing is better transitions. But I think this is, going at the, human performance aspect does two things. One, it aligns the organization behind the objective. And two, I kept saying over the weekend, if you had tried to get me to think about anything except for preparing for war while I was preparing for war, I would have told you to fuck off. Like, I just wouldn't have done it. So if you tie it back for me as a Marine to performance, we're going to make you a better Marine. This is about your development, again, physically, mentally, emotionally, spiritually. Then there's a chance we would get somebody's attention. The other thing that might get my attention is if like an NFL player had walked in the door and said, dude, grabbed me by the shirt collar and said, dude, you need to do this. You need to pay attention to this. This is important too. And that's kind of the underlying premise of this, is that the NFL guys told me the same thing. They're like, yeah, those players aren't going to listen to anybody. But if a veteran walked in the door, they'd listen. So
I guess it's time to see if those class alphas still fit.
No, my God, they don't. I can guarantee you they don't.
All right.
But yeah, how about your weekend, man?
Mine was far more mundane. Just Lindsay was working this weekend, so I had some dad duties. My dad's in town as well. So it was kind of, I got to spend some time with him. We went to a movie with the kids yesterday afternoon, for example. Also, kind of helping to take care of my father-in-law. So Lindsay, for whatever reason, by just kind of happenstance, has been working every Sunday since her mom passed, and so she was a big church lady. Cliff is my father-in-law, likes to go to church as well, and so I would just try to just keep him company. I just go there with him to church last couple of Sundays, and that's not normally my habit. If Lindsay works, like I don't go to church by myself, etc. But yeah, so got to do a little church with Cliff. Went and looked at some of the stuff. We have the memorial services coming up next weekend, and so just kind of final preparations and helping Cliff to kind of feel comfortable what's going on there. So so did that. Kind of the highlight of the weekend, though, was I had an awesome steak on Saturday night, but more specifically, it was my sister's birthday.
Was that your excuse to get the awesome steak?
It kind of was. Yeah, so my sister asked for steaks for her birthday, and so I said I will oblige, and we had just a really nice night kind of sitting out in the evening there. One of the things I love about Denver is no matter how hot it gets during the day, it always gets down into the 60s at night. It's very, very unusual for it to, for the low temperature to be above 70 degrees. And so as soon as the sun sets, they're just really awesome evenings. And so I was able to just enjoy kind of a summer evening with my family and a good steak.
That sounds good. Do you mind me asking, was it a Costco steak?
Well, how about we get into the news?
All right, we can get into the news.
All right, folks. Yeah. All right, buckle up. It's time for the news you need, the part of the show where we fly through the headlines like fighter jet through a thunderstorm, low, fast, and a little turbulent. We've got a few conspiracies, chemtrails, fraudsters, and floods. So basically, standard 2025. First up, Jeffrey Epstein. Yep, that guy. This week, the Justice Department declared that the long rumored Epstein client list basically, I guess doesn't exist. According to them, there's no secret list of high-profile pedophiles and no evidence Epstein was murdered in jail. Naturally, parts of the MAGA crowd are having a total systems failure. Remember, for years, the story was a conspiracy jackpot, child trafficking, deep state cover-ups, even maybe like Hillary Clinton in a devil robe at a Comet ping pong. It was effectively Pizzagate 2.0 on steroids with a private island and a lot more plane rides. So when Trump's own allies like Kash Patel say Epstein actually did kill himself and there's no secret evidence, it's like telling a ghost hunter the house is just old plumbing. Elon Musk freaked out. Alex Jones threatened to puke. Trump himself said people still talking about Epstein are, quote, weak, which is, of course, pretty rich coming from a guy who once bragged about knowing Epstein like everyone else. Kind of a classic case of conspiracy expectations clashing with real-world disappointment. The facts, boring, shadow cabal, now that's content. Speaking of conspiracy theorists trying to influence the government, let's go ahead and talk about Laura Loomer. You might remember her as the far-right provocateur who got banned from Uber and Lyft, I should say, for saying she didn't want to ride with Muslims. Well, now she's apparently influencing who gets fired from the National Security Council. Yeah, so that's how we're running the government. Loomer reportedly gave Trump a list of disloyal staffers, and not long after, several top NSC officials, including a general, were shown the door. Trump denies she had anything to do with it. Loomer, meanwhile, is doing a few victory laps. Of course, this is the same Laura Loomer who once chained herself to Twitter's headquarters and claimed 9/11 was an inside job. Even other Republicans have called her a crazy conspiracy theorist. So naturally, she's whispering in the ear of the GOP president. We've officially entered the choose your own national security advisor phase of American politics. Up to the next thing about fraud, and specifically, let's talk about a gal named Charlie Javis. 34 one-year-old Penn grad and former founder of Frank has started the claim to help students apply for financial aid. Javis just got convicted of fraud and conspiracy for faking a customer base to sell her company to JP Morgan for $175 million. She said Frank had Frank had over 4 million users, but in reality it was fewer than 300,000. The rest were just made up, conjured up like ghosts in a spreadsheet. She now faces up to 30 years in prison and becomes the latest member of the unofficial Forbes 30 under 30, but over the legal limit club. She joins a rogues gallery of Sam Bankman-Fried, Caroline Ellison, Elizabeth Holmes, Martin Shkreli. At this point, Forbes shouldn't include a disclaimer, which is that inclusion may result in prosecution. The lesson is that if anybody sounds like the next Zuckerberg but can't explain what they actually do, you probably shouldn't hand them a blank check. Now on to the weather. Well, at least sort of. Marjorie Taylor Greene, the congresswoman from Georgia, and bless her cloud-watching heart, is calling for a hearing on weather modification. She wants to make it a felony to spray chemicals into the sky to control the weather, or as more commonly known as chemtrails. Why now? Well, because after the devastating Texas floods earlier this month, a bunch of conspiracy accounts decided the real culprit wasn't climate change, it was cloud seeding. One small experiment did happen before the storm, but actual meteorologists said it had nothing to do with the deadly flood. Still, Greene's leaning right on in. She's pitching legislation to stop the spraying of unknown substances, which sounds more like a Glade commercial than a climate policy. But cloud seeding, it's real science. It doesn't turn rain clouds into weapons of mass destruction, though, and it definitely didn't cause a 26-foot wall of water slam into a Texas summer camp. But, that's a member of Congress treating science like fan fiction. And while we're on the topic of the floods, they are getting worse. Since July 4th, we've had 4 so-called 1 in 1,000 year rain events: North Carolina, New Mexico, Chicago, and of course, Texas, where that storm killed more than 130 people and swept cars into trees like they were Hot Wheels. These aren't just unlucky coincidences. Warmer air holds more moisture, as we've talked about on the show before, about 4% more per degree Fahrenheit. That means when it rains, it pours, quite literally. And lately, it's been pouring in biblical quantities. So far this year, the U.S. has issued more flash flood warnings than ever before at this point in the calendar. Scientists aren't saying this might happen someday. They're saying it's happening right now. And while Marjorie Taylor Greene is up there yelling at the sky, the rest of us need to be focused on infrastructure, drainage systems, emergency alerts, and of course, cutting emissions before we need scuba gear to walk the dog. So that's your weekend news. The Epstein list, quote unquote, doesn't exist, but the conspiracy theories sure do. Laura Loomer's handing out pink slips. Another young grifter learns the hard way that faking users isn't a business model. And Marjorie Taylor Greene is fighting the sky. Meanwhile, the actual sky is really trying to dry on us. So stay sharp, stay curious, and don't let the loudest YouTube channel tell you what's real. What do you think of that rogues gallery, Neil?
Oh my gosh. What a mess, man. That's a bunch of crazy stories. I mean, I'll start with the Epstein list. I have been ignoring this for as long as possible. It's so loud now. I don't know how we can ignore it. I guess I'll start with, I still believe in the FBI. I mean, I've said that on previous episodes. I have friends there. I believe in the integrity of that organization. And if they say there's no list, there's probably no list. But this, at the end, the other side of this is, it's sort of a spectacle to see, these right-wing podcasters that, have just spout bullshit every day about, things like Sandy Hook, the elementary school shooting that eventually ended up in court, and Jones ended up getting penalized for that, or found, I don't know, it was a civil suit, right? So he didn't get found guilty, but he had to pay some amount. And then this, there's a lot of folks that make money off of extreme content that generates clicks and views, and now it's coming back to bite them. I don't have a lot of sympathy for that.
Yeah, as I was sitting there thinking about the news stories that we want to talk about today, and just about like how prevalent conspiracy theories are in our world now. Like we've gone from where it used to be like this outlandish, oh, we didn't land on the moon, or there was a second shooter on the grassy knoll, or some of that stuff, or Bigfoot, right, which was fun when we were kids. So now it's like part of the constant conversation of our world. And I think that just comes from this sense that like something ain't right. Something doesn't match up. The world that is expected it or knew it is not matching up with the reality that I'm seeing. And I think it's just kind of worth like pulling apart. Like, where do conspiracy theories come from? I mean, like, do you have any thoughts?
Well, I mean, if you zoom out, we used to get our news from 2 or 3 trusted sources. The Walter Cronkite days, where we had a couple of trusted sources and could just sort of live in the same reality. And you always had extremes on the far left and the far right, about 10% each. I think now that thousands of local newspapers have shut down at the same time where digital content has sprouted up, at a rapid rate. You've got anybody can be a source of news. And, we're part of that. We've got, our own podcast, and we're bringing news to people as well. But you factor that in with something we talked to Michael O'Hurley about, a month and a half ago on this podcast, where, we each end up in our own media silos. And if you end up in a media silo and you build trust with a guy like Kash Patel, who said some stuff that appealed to you, and then he tells you this other thing about the Epstein list, first, you're not getting information from an alternative source, or, maybe you're not. You should, but maybe you're not. And then if you've trusted Kash Patel on other issues and he tells you about this Epstein list, you're more inclined to trust him then too. So I don't know. I think that comes from that that's the root of it, is that these folks like Kash Patel are, motivated by money, power, and status. They get that with clicks and views, and they get more clicks and views with extreme content.
Yeah, I would say there's always been like the carnival barker that got attention, right? And so like I think that that's not new. What's new, I think, is a couple of things. I think you hit it there. One, which is like this really fragmented media landscape where people are getting their news from kind of all over the place, and any little story could start to feel believable. But part of it, I think, is like social media and the fact that there's so much of what seems to be commentary is really false commentary. It's driven by international actors that are not trying to come to truth, but to try to drive a certain dissatisfaction. I think some of it's driven by the algorithms themselves, which like help to reward that behavior, right? The carnival barker used to have to stand up in front of a bunch of people in order to get that, and you had to like get their attention, and it was just harder to do it, right? And so social media has made it a lot easier. But the third one is that I think that there's a sense that like American democracy is not working at its core, and that like all the things that we talk about, like about, you want to believe that this country is, a meritocracy, and that your vote has impact, and a couple other things. And we just keep seeing evidence that it kind of doesn't. And so I think it drives this sense of unease that makes it available for other people to like sit down and be like, no, you know what? This is bullshit. This doesn't work. None of this makes sense. And so then they try to make sense of it. And then, they find the carnival barker online.
Yeah. Well, we put that together.
I don't know. What do you think?
Yeah. Well, I think you're right. I just think, I'll tie that. The carnival barker got to that 10% on either side. That's my version of the story, is like, you've always had the extremes. They've just been smaller. Now, instead of 10% on either side, the left has grown some. It's, I don't know, somewhere in the 12 to 13% range. If you look at the data, the right has grown massively. It's now in the sort of 28 to 32% range, which is kind of, Trump's base. There's a lot of people in the middle that are not extreme and like Trump. So I'm not putting it all together, but certainly the extreme, the fringe has grown from that 10% to something much wider. I'll also say that, part of the appeal of, which the Cash Patel and, as you say, the Carnival Barker has always been, the world is a complicated place. If it's not working for you in particular, you're looking for answers to those questions. And, Cash and his, and Jones and Tucker Carlson, they're offering easy answers to really complicated questions. The real answers are much more difficult to explain. The easy answer is to blame some pedophile cabal and say it's all part of a plan that somebody's in charge of. And if we could just take that group down, we'd all be better off. It's unfortunately way harder to explain than that.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting about that pedophile cabal, which is, we'll talk about this more, but actually something, I don't know about the pedophile cabal, but the idea that like Epstein was really connected to a lot of powerful and wealthy people, I do buy that. And I also actually don't buy the idea that he killed himself. Like I think that there were, so that's the one conspiracy kind of theory that part that I am willing to buy into.
I mean, well, look at it is not totally random that there's a piece of that video that's missing. I don't know how. I mean, maybe you can go back and look, but how often do pieces of video go missing on security cameras? I don't think it's that often. So I'm with you. I think there's something fishy there.
Yeah, there's. I suspect that he was connected in. This is now. I'm really going to go full conspiracy here.
Yeah, let's do it.
I suspect that Epstein was connected in with a 3-letter agency. That's about like why so much of this is being protected and why he was allowed to kind of operate with impunity and why he was like essentially like softballed his first conviction. Like it doesn't make sense to me why he was continued to allowed to operate when it was so blatantly kind of out in the open from a criminal perspective, except for maybe the simplest answer here is that our system of justice is not working. We actually don't really hold people of power to account. But I don't know. Like that would be the conspiracy that I might be willing to engage with.
I absolutely. I mean, there's so much of our justice system that is disproportionate. If you have money, can afford a lawyer, and you know the right people, you get a different justice system than the rest of it. I mean, you look at it from a corporate perspective. I can't tell you how many times I've had a conversation when I was in a bigger company that it was like, the right and wrong here is way less important than how much each side can pay for lawyers. That's just that's a reality. I've accepted it. It's one of those things, worry about the things you can control. I don't spend a lot of time worrying about that. It is an unfortunate part of our legal system. In this case, I think there's a lot of believability to he was just a weird dude. He hung out with a lot of rich people. He knew them, but they weren't part of any of his, more sinister activities. And, and then one day he got a sweetheart deal because he pulled some strings and promised some things. And then, and then he just offed himself. All of that is very believable. But there's also some smoke around it where you're like, yeah, we should probably pick at this a bit more. Like, as you say, like, how did he get such a sweetheart deal? Even that one was pretty special. And yeah, my other question is around the video. I just don't think it's very common for somebody that has, his kind of status and was already said to be on suicide watch. You don't mess that up. If you're a federal detention center, you make sure he's got somebody watching him all the time, and you sure as hell don't like let the video lapse.
Yeah, it's kind of like the missing minutes from the Nixon tapes or whatever. Like that seemed to be as much the smoking gun as anything that was on the tapes themselves. Yeah, I don't think he killed himself. So that's the one conspiracy theory I will buy into. But it does kind of tie into this larger idea, though, right? Which is, as you were kind of talking about, like this pedophile ring or whatever. Like, there's a reality here, which is that a lot of these people are already known through other means of being sexually inappropriate in a lot of different ways. The current president of the United States bragged on camera or bragged on, secretly being recorded. He didn't know it. That about grabbing women by the pussy. He's been reported of having walked in on the underage contestants of like the Miss Teen USA. Because he wanted to see like naked girls. Like he's a scumbag 10 times over in public. We know about this, and then like, but we're so focused on the Epstein list that we're not willing to believe like actual reporting and real women that are telling these stories. We don't need a conspiracy theory. So like there's like this disconnect to me about like, yeah, is there kind of a different rules for the wealthy and the well connected, especially if you're a guy, especially if you're white, especially a bunch of these other kind of like layers that are put on top of it. Yeah, 100%. But like we know this too. We already know this shit. Like we don't need an Epstein list to know that, but that Trump was doing this sort of stuff, or that Bill Clinton himself was a scumbag. Like we've done this. We've seen it.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. First, I think I'll say everybody knows who Trump is, and you're either okay with it or not. To me, it's a little bit crazy that people are so okay with it. I'm not okay with it. Like, I think his scumbaggishness is disqualifying. But obviously, clearly, a majority of the country didn't think it was disqualifying. So, I mean, that's part of what I've said about, we have to come to grips with who we are. We collectively, America, elected this guy. And yeah, I mean, I think nobody can defend his actions. Nobody tries to. They just look the other way and they're okay with it. It's sort of like when I say like, oh, so you're with the insurrectionists. Like, people just made their peace with that. They probably don't agree with my characterization of it, but that is in fact, I mean, he's the guy who encouraged an insurrection. So like, you're with him. Okay. That's your choice. That said, I will say what's really, this whole Epstein scandal is about, these guys got caught. I don't know how they didn't think ahead, but they got caught. Like this whole, for every one of these right wing influencers, bloggers, Cash Patel, whatever, all lived on this. This was part of what they campaigned on. This was really important that, Trump was going to be the guy to uncover some of this, that was going to, reveal how, there was a Democrat-led, Hillary Clinton-led pedophile ring that was at the center of, all sorts of crazy. And look, when you tell a lie, usually it'll come back to bite you at some point. What's been so amazing about the Trump era is that most of those lies have not come back to bite him. I mean, there's been a million lies, and people like find ways to discount them. Oh, he didn't really mean it, or that's just the way he talks. And they sort of figured out a way to be okay with it. This is one where it actually caught up with them, but like there are more, right? This isn't the only one. There have been more and more. And I guess maybe there's some hope that since this one has been so dramatically revealed to be a lie, that maybe they'll look at other potential lies. That's actually how people bust out of cults. There's like, first of all, you don't bust out of a cult by, some outsider telling you you're wrong. You bust out of a cult when there's some kernel of like, that didn't quite add up. And it came from the inside. It was like an internal, like, they call it putting something on the shelf, like something that just doesn't quite sit right with you. And then you start examining other things. And there are examples of people busting out of cults because the whole thing unravels, but it starts with one small kernel. So I don't know. I don't think that's going to happen here. I think but it gives me some hope that, these guys have been exposed for at least one of their lies.
Yeah. I saw a chart a little while back. I mean, it's been about like 10 years, but it's based off of this study of like the likelihood of a public policy being enacted versus the support that it had from the public. And it was really dispiriting because it was a flat line, which is to say the support of the public is effectively irrelevant. I can't even talk today. Irrelevant to whether it gets passed. If it has 0% support, it's got a certain percentage of passing. If it's got 100% report, it's the same percentage. It has nothing to do with actually what the general public thinks. But there's a very tight correlation between public support, support from the elites versus it getting passed. Which gives you like this really kind of like dark view of like American democracy. Like, how well are we doing here? That like if things have broad public support, but they don't have elite support, then it's not going to get passed. And it made me think a little bit about, I think that feeds into conspiracy. Like the idea that like there's maybe a sense of powerlessness that people talk about space lasers or some other like their cabal of whomever, but underlying it is this idea that you just don't have power. I think that I kind of think the same thing with the power of like why people like why gun culture kind of so exploded in this country over the last like 30, 40 years, because like it's a kind of Second Amendment's been here from the founding of the country. We've had guns for a very, very long time, but like, why is it that all of a sudden that people like identify with the gun, that aren't like desperados in the old West? Like this is like, suburban, dads that like, probably couldn't run a mile, but like, now they're identifying like their masculinity associated with this weapon. And I think it's to this feeling of like they're powerless in kind of larger systems. And so they're trying to create this sense of like order around them. And so I wonder if that's kind of all tied together in conspiracy theories, is that people really don't feel like they have power. And to a certain extent, they're correct. They are sensing reality, but attributing the reasons.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense to me. I don't know which of those is done. I mean, I think when I say those, I think loss of power and also looking for an explanation, and adopting the easy answer rather than the more complicated one. Maybe they go together. I guess they kind of dovetail, right? If you lost power and you are struggling to understand why, and then well, there you go. I guess that's the authoritarian playbook. Like then that is the authoritarian playbook. You've lost, blame those other people, whoever those other people are. Most recently, it's been immigrants, but it's been those people. They're to blame.
So I guess maybe we should switch to kind of like the next thing here of around conspiracy is like, like where do we go from here? Like or maybe we should start with like, there's real problems we are not addressing associated with it. Right now, we're all focused on carnival barkers. Like, what is your metric for like whether something is true? How do you suss out the truth yourself?
Yeah, I mean, I also want to acknowledge you mentioned parts of this Epstein thing that I find or that you found believable. The other one that I find believable is the COVID origins. I think we got shut down early. That COVID came from the wet meat market or whatever that's called, and the wet markets, right, in Wuhan. Yeah, and like it's a little weird that they, the Chinese government was doing like testing on the COVID virus and different variants of the COVID virus in Wuhan. So that's just like a coincidence, I guess. I actually, it's one of those things that initially seemed racist and preposterous. And the more I heard about it, the more I sort of started to try to make sense of it. I still haven't decided for myself one way or the other. But to answer your question, what I've done is I've tried to consult many sources. I've tried to talk to many different people about it. And, my medical professional people are like, yeah, it's possible. My Chinese friends are like, yeah, actually, we have very little understanding of what the government's doing. Other people are like, yeah, but here are the 10 reasons why it's probably not plausible. So, I mean, I go back to news sources, and you mentioned social media as a way to like, we all have to bust out of our little information silos, one, and consult different sources, and two, freaking talk to each other. like you've heard me talk before about like purposefully going to talk to my conservative friends. I'm very middle of the road, but I get, by the way, because of the bubble I live in, I get a lot from the left already. But I make a point of going to talk to people that I'm not exposed to very much because it expands my view of things. And what seems in my left wing bubble totally preposterous, when you listen to the logic in the right wing bubble, they're like, oh, well, I can at least see why you think that. And in some cases, I discount it. In other cases, I dig in deeper.
I think the talking is part of it, but I think there's been this death of expertise that also kind of leads to it, and the idea that like we don't really value experts, but to a certain extent, like experts have kind of hidden behind credentials to a certain as well. Like, um, I developed a certain amount of expertise when it came to carbon markets. I have exactly zero credentials associated with that, and so it got to thinking about why do people value what I have to say. Um, Sometimes when I'm on like social media, it's just my voice, literally. Like, I think that's a little bit of an asset that I have, and I think we're psychologically programmed to listen to like a deeper voice. So I think that happens sometimes. I'm a white guy, so I think sometimes that helps a little bit. I've got this, look of being a relatively trustworthy person that can be cultivated. You don't have to actually. You can look at the Theranos gal that spoke with a really deep voice that was really weird, but everybody just like went with it because she was wearing like the turtleneck. She kind of looked like Steve Jobs, but a blonde woman version of it and speaking with this kind of weirdly low voice, but like everyone rolled with it. Like she cultivated that. What gives her this sense of authority and this degree of expertise, even though it was all bullshit. It was a multi-year smoke and mirrors campaign associated with it. So I think that there's part of that, but and so I try to like how do people suss out what reality is, what appears like an expert, who really is an expert, um, and I think you have to default um, to multiple sources. I think you have to default um, to a certain degree to starting with credentials, right? But then the person with the credentials has to prove themselves out by also referencing different sources, high quality primary sources, rather than reporting here, reporting there. And I think that's really confusing for a lot of people. And I think that's part of like what feeds our conspiracy culture as well.
Yeah, it, well, because and tie it back to call it the attention economy, people aren't really getting to know one source that they can trust. They're not vetting the sources. They're not taking the time. I don't have the time to dig into everything. So you're really forced to build this mosaic of truth. It's really hard. And I think, you can rely on some trusted voices, but there's so much. I mean, to your point about expertise, like within that, how do you decipher when credentials? I agree, credentials have been wildly misused and are therefore devalued in so many ways. I don't know. I mean, I guess this is where I come back to. This is a very conservative point of view. The news. I mean, journalism has journalistic standards, and they're not perfect, and they are biased, but at least they cite their sources and won't print things they're not sure of. And it goes back to sort of the 100,000 voices you could listen to on Twitter or other social media places or the news, whatever. I think professional journalistic standards are a way to ensure that you're getting some trustworthy information. And not to say that they're perfect, but that's why you consult multiple sources.
Yeah, there's a graph or a little chart that you used to see online, and it was I'm struggling to remember the name of the organization. It talked about like left versus right bias, and then like the quality of it versus opinionated, etc. Um, I'm trying to remember the name of it. There was another organization called All Sides that I would use sometimes to reference to look at multiple sources, etc. But I think it comes back to again like this idea of um, is actually now that I think about it, that chart was ad fontes, I think is what it was called. Um, but I think it comes back to this thing that we learned in the military, and the idea that like trust is earned and easily lost, and I think people would do well to like copy that when it comes to their news sources. You should trust a news source, but when it's lost, you should leave it. Um, you know, and that's the part that gets me sometimes is like Fox News, for example, had to like go into court and say that they're not news, that they're entertainment, and then they had to pay billions, something like that, like a huge amount of money.
Yeah, it's like 700 and something fat million. Yeah.
Yeah, so for lying about voting machines, because that's what it was. It was a oft repeated lie that Fox News did that just was damaging to the fundamentals of American democracy as well. Um, they had to pay hundreds of millions of dollars associated with this, and so you've got all this evidence of like they are not an honest player. At the same time, there's conservative media like the Wall Street Journal, which has always had like high integrity for its reporting, and it keeps its conservative opinion just to the opinion pages. But it's a kind of a Joe Friday, just the facts, ma'am, sort of thing for the reporting within the page, the news stories. And so I wonder why everybody is attracted to the OANs and the Fox Newses of the world, or the MSNBCs, if you want, on the other side, and not to the Wall Street Journals or the New York Times that have like these journalistic standards that rank out pretty well in the Ad Fontes media chart.
Yeah, I mean, I'll start with this. I was in Iraq in 2004, and in the middle of fighting, I was a forward air controller at the time in Ramadi and reading newspaper articles about what we were doing in Ramadi, and started questioning the sort of journalistic integrity of the New York Times and Time Magazine, which was, magazines were still a bigger deal back then. So I've been on my own journey on all of this stuff. I started to sort of distrust some of the media because it just wasn't fully accurate in its reporting on what I was doing. Usually you're an observer thousands of miles away from the story. In this case, I was in the middle of the action. I think though what happened is that politicians and, authoritarian leaning politicians started to exploit that weakness. That there was I wasn't the only one that started to question the news sources that were out there at a time when we were getting access to more social media and more different kinds of news sources, right? That you had Breitbart on the right, you had HuffPo on the left, and all these, more and more voices started piling in. We got further away from the Walter Cronkite era, if you will. But this is part of the authoritarian playbook, which is, sow distrust in the media. And if you get people to question everything they read, it's all bullshit. They can't question anything except for if it comes right from the source. Then, the source being the politician themselves, then, you've sowed the seeds that allow things like these conspiracy theories that we've been talking about to really take off.
Yeah. And it's to our general detriment. We have a congresswoman who's trying to make laws based on chemtrails, which as two former pilots, we know is absolute bullshit. But is not willing to make, policy based on climate change, which is actually the real effect of high altitude aviation is a lot of effect on the climate. That's what's really is a major part. It's not exclusive, but is a major part about all these floods that we've been having and the deaths associated with it. That's going to get worse. It's just fucking physics. And instead, we're voting in clowns that are talking about chemtrails because they don't want to talk about the reality of it. Like, when do you think, like, when do people wake up? When do they wake up to the bullshit and just decide like enough of this?
Yeah, I think we're the pendulum always seems to swing back and forth. I think, I have hope that the younger generations will grow up with these influences and better recognize the need to really understand the sources and understand how these systems work. Meaning, my son, he's 11, he's already got a pretty good handle on, that guy's he just makes stuff up all the time. He's just watching video, like YouTube videos on his video game thing. But I wonder, I don't know this, but I wonder if they're going to be a little smarter about being able to ferret out the crap. You contrast that with my dad, who gets an email and it's not from a Nigerian prince, but it might as well be, right?
Yeah.
But he sends it to me and he's like, hey, who is this guy who's writing to me? So I think as a society, there's some of those things that'll be easier for the younger generation to ferret out. I also think we have to invest in training our kids to not only understand civics, but also to understand how to read the news, how to navigate a very complex world where they're going to be responsible for really deciding which sources they trust and which ones they don't. The alternative, by the way, is to squelch speech, which I've already been, on the record as saying I can't get behind. Right, I'm a almost absolutist when it comes to free speech. We're not gonna crush these voices, these crazy voices from both the left and the right. The right answer is not to squash those voices, but to fill the zone with accurate information and to really train the next generation to find its way through that mess.
I'm not sure I'm quite as optimistic about that. A couple reasons. First one is that I'm teaching my kids to filter out the bullshit, but the people that are chugging bullshit by the gallon are not teaching their kids how to do it, right? And so, I mean, to a large extent, a lot of the public policy making problems in the United States are based on there's a group of people that are connected to reality and a group of people that are not. And so there's no amount of education that I've seen that educates the people, to your point of the cult. There's no amount of education that gets people out of the bullshit cult, and into reality, right? The idea it's sometimes I think I've been thinking about this online conversation I've been having with a former shipmate of mine who is a good pilot, good guy. I know his wife. I'm sure he's a good father. His wife's great. But I also think about I'm showing him direct evidence of abuses of the government towards immigrants, right? Direct evidence. This is not here's a pic. It's not AI generated. Here's some photos. Here's a video. Here is a court case. And he finds every possible way to deny it. And I try not to preach. I'm trying to just show, not tell. But there's, so I think about him and I think about his kids, are they really, how fine tuned is their bullshit meter going to be? Since, they're believing a certain thing it's just objectively false. His belief structure. And I love the guy. I wish him well. It's got to be difficult because I know his wife is connected to reality. So it's got to be difficult to kind of that's got to be a difficult marriage to a certain extent too. And there's been lots of reporting about that. So I'm not so sanguine that if we just educate people that they'll get out of it. If you present two different sides of the story, people naturally, some of them will just pick the one side, even if the two sides, one is reality and one is just made up conspiracy horse shit. There are people that are going to be doing it. I mean, the most recent example was who's the Greg Gutfeld. He has his thing on Fox every evening. It's a very highly watched show, and he decided just that the way that the African American community took possession of the N-word and kind of made it their own. He was going to take possession of his N-word, which was Nazi, and so he started saying things like "No, Nazi, please." and you're just like, yo, dude, that's not funny. It's not appropriate. You shouldn't be like trying to identify with like Nazi, but like that was something he did last week. Um, and it's because like the ecosystem seems to be favoring that if we present it as a binary choice, then it's okay to be in the awful camp, because the awful camp, if you're in amongst your friends, is not so awful. So that's why I'm skeptical of that.
Yeah. Um, my positive pants come from, it's a very long-term view. When I say think things are going to get better, I don't think they're going to get better in the next like 2 or 3 years or 10 years. I think generationally they'll get better. I'll also say, I've studied this quite a bit. I think the first thing with your friend is to recognize that it comes from his heart, not his head. There's some emotion that's driving him to the conclusion that, that he is. And like, you guys share the same values. The reason I'm just going to guess, the reason he's so fired up about immigration or willing to defend it is because in his reality, your point about he and his wife probably live in different realities, but in his reality, there's all sorts of immigrants that are in this country because of Biden's crazy open border policy, which again, I've been on record as saying like Biden's border policy was awful. But now the stories he's being told in his media sources are that there's, lots and lots of immigrants doing horrible harm to our most vulnerable. Women and children are being murdered and raped, and communities are being destroyed, all at the hands of these immigrants. I have no idea who your friend is, but what I would say is that there's something good in that. He has a protector mindset that is saying like, there's bad being done in the world, and I want to protect those people. The way to connect with him, again, this is just based on, what other people have taught me, pastors and the like. The way to connect with him is to say, you know what? I understand the underlying reason why. I don't know what his reasons are, but you got to get to the underlying reasons. You got to get to the emotion. You say, look, I care about our women and children too, and connect on the values level and then build up from there. I think you pointing him to videos when it's in his heart and not his head, he's just going to look past the grab him by the pussy video. He's going to look past all the awful things that Trump says and does, and including these ICE agents wearing masks and doing awful things. They're going to look past all that because it's justified, because it's in their heart. They know that they're, let me just say, they don't know it. They feel it.
But even if I provide him evidence that like immigrants, including immigrants here without like legal status, commit crime at lower rates, it's like if we wanted to reduce crime, one way we could do it would be by diluting native-born Americans, because the people that are moving here are less criminally inclined than native-born Americans. Like, but that doesn't address the heart part either, right? It's a fact. That's reality. That's the truth. Now, I'm not saying we should do that, but I mean, I'm saying like if his thing is we need to protect Americans, like the best thing that we could do to protect them, to protect law-abiding Americans would be to like export or like get rid of all the American men. Like, like if you want to go after a demographic of people that are committing the most crime, it's native-born American men. And we're not talking about that. Like, so like we're just kind of in this like this whatever feels like I'm doing this from a place of protection, but I want to do it by cascading, going after like really vulnerable people. Like I am having a hard time like creating tolerance and acceptance and trying to find a place of love. Doesn't he have some responsibility for connecting with reality and connecting with the fact that like his line of reasoning is bullshit?
Well, let me unpack it one more step further. Again, from a pastor I know. I didn't say you're going to solve it by what I described. What I'm saying is that the start of the conversation needs to be emotional, not mental. You can start with, "Hey, bro, I get that too. Those, I hate to see our most vulnerable attacked. I acknowledge that. But then you got to keep digging because it's not just that that's bothering him. It may be, for example, one conversation I had here was like, generally speaking, people are pissed off about all of the little inconveniences that come with having society change. And what I mean by that is like you go through the checkout counter at the grocery store and the checkout clerk doesn't speak English. You're like, what the fuck, man? Like 10 years ago, I didn't have to deal with this. And it's a little thing, but it's death by 1,000 cuts. So there's like 1,000 of those things that everything's just a little bit. I've got to make an accommodation for that person who's in my checkout line that I didn't have to make 10 years ago. My cousin was just sort of like, oh, there's this program for immigrant kids at my kid's school and they get lunch for free. But I'm not getting lunch for free. What? Why? And so there's another like little death by 1,000 cuts. It's just like, there's these little things that eat at someone and they're like, okay, so I've got less, but they're getting money and I've got to make accommodations for like people in the checkout line. Now, by itself, that would just be annoying. But then you bring this back to an authoritarian leaning leader who wants to provide simple answers to hard problems. The hard problem, I mean, this is like we have immigrants in our community because we've always had immigrants in our community. And because they do jobs that most Americans don't want to do, picking strawberries and cutting meat in the meat plant and a bunch of other things. We actually grow our economy because these immigrants come in, but there's adjustments that have to be made as a result. And those 1,000 adjustments cut at us. Not, these aren't racist reactions. These aren't bad people reactions. These are just a little bit of like, that sucks. And if somebody offers me a simple answer, which is we got to kick out the bad immigrants, we have to protect our kids by X, Y, and Z. There's and oh, by the way, the Democrats are making this all super easy for the immigrants and making it hard on you. And I'm going to make it easy on you. Here's a bunch of things we're going to do to fight for you. Then you're willing to look past the, grab 'em by the pussy video. Then you're willing to look past the ICE agents in masks doing awful things. It's rational and reasonable. I keep saying like your buddy and all my cousins and my military buddies, they're good, highly moral people. How do they come back? They come back with you connecting on that values level of like, yeah, man, I care about the kids too, and go from there.
I mean, sure. I get it from kind of like a real connection sort of stance there, but I don't hear anything like this conversation happening on the right about how they can find common cause. Like, why is it that they get to throw kind of a temper tantrum of irrationality that's emotionally based on, I don't wanna, and I have to find all the, my faith compels me, right? As a Christian, I work towards that, right? But the left brain in my head is just like, no, like they have a duty, they have a responsibility. Like the people that are engaging in lies and conspiracy, like I think down at their core, they know it's bullshit. And they're just willing to continue with the lie because it's like an identity and they want attention. And so sometimes I feel like we're almost like feeding their attention needing rather than actually like engaging with them. Like they're not really seriously interested in like trying to find common cause. What they want me to do is to tell them they're special. And so I try not to be judgmental like that but like that's the unease in me is it's just one big kind of attention seeking sort of behavior.
Well, I go back to the media sources are a huge part of it. I mean, it's a chicken or the egg, right? You've got to have a willing participant that chooses that media source. Some of it, I'll say, my uncle drove truck for 30 years or something. He got pulled into the Rush Limbaugh world because he was bored, and Rush Limbaugh was entertaining. And Rush Limbaugh was like his, what do you call that? Like the entry drug or whatever.
His gateway drug.
Gateway drug. Thank you. And from there, he started listening to other more extreme content, I think it starts with that the checkout clerk not speaking English and his cousin, that would be, it's the same family, by the way. It's like his cousin being annoyed that, the immigrant child gets the free lunch and her child doesn't. And that media ecosystem, the Rush Limbaugh ecosystem, feeds him all the easy answers. And that is then, they are just in a different reality. If you've ever tried to watch Sean Hannity, you ever tried to do that?
I can't.
It's
I sit
impossible.
and it's
I
don't know how anybody can sit and watch it.
It's that's the same. If you watch Sean Hannity most nights, try to watch something like on ABC. It's fucking hard because it's so different. It's just a mind fuck. Like I try to watch Sean Hannity, and it's just so different than my own reality. It makes me so uncomfortable, and I am trying to force myself to sit through it, but it's hard because it's unhinged from our day to day. And so, look, I'm not saying that there's no responsibility for the individual to break themselves out of that. But this is my explanation for how it happens. Somebody starts with these little death by 1,000 cuts inconveniences that they just don't want to have to deal with, and they have to accommodate somebody else. That turns into an emotional festering. They go looking for answers, and all those answers are ready-made in that right-wing media ecosystem. And that right-wing media ecosystem is driven, just like all social media. They want money, status, and power. They are willing to say the bullshit. Look at Ted Cruz, who knows better, saying a bunch of stuff that is absolutely batshit crazy, but he wants money, status, and power. The blogger wants the same thing, and they get it through clicks and views, and clicks and views are much easier to get with extreme content. Wild ass content, easy answers to life's complicated problems. I'm sure Hardpoints podcast is not going to be as wildly popular as InfoWars, because we're just not going to do as extreme a content, answering easy answers to complex problems, et cetera, et cetera. We are just by definition limited by how successful we're going to be. But anyway, that's the root of it. You've got two sides of that ecosystem. One side looking for those answers, another side more than willing to provide them at a price.
Yeah. And in fairness, I can't watch MSNBC either, right? Like there are
totally
left versions of this, like you have to want to engage in this this weird rah-rah bullshit.
Totally.
So sometimes I think it's really, again, to kind of go back to my faith, is I think the only way that these people are ever going to be convinced is when God illuminates it for them. And it reminds me, do you remember that miniseries Band of Brothers? Yeah, so great miniseries. It's all about, this Easy Company, part of the 101st as they went into Europe and ultimately ended up, I think it's the second last episode in the series, is they end up uncovering a concentration camp. And in that episode, at the beginning of the episode, the character that's played by Ron Livingston, the actor from Office Space and a couple other places, he's kind of like a drunk, and he's looking around in this German house for alcohol. And he ends up bumping the picture of this German officer off, and the house is empty, or so he thinks. And then this very steely-eyed German woman comes out and is just staring at him of how dare you enter my house and bump the picture of my dear husband. And without speaking, he leaves. And so he feels a sense of shame associated with this. And so it changes a little bit of his behavior. But more interestingly is a little bit later in that show, after they uncover this concentration camp, I think it was Dachau, they uncover this concentration camp, and then the locals claim that they didn't know anything about it. And so they ended up bringing the entire local population to start cleaning up this concentration camp, which is just the absolutely horrifically gruesome duty of stacking emaciated, abused bodies into mass graves. And then there's this point where Ron Livingston locks eyes with that woman again, and she's hauling the bodies, and all of a sudden her pride of like, how dare you enter my house, like she comes to realize like the foundation that it was built on was just was abuse. And so sometimes I think about that as we have to stand resolute for reality and for the truth right now, and that the house that's built upon abuse will crumble eventually, and it's only going to be when kind of God shows them the way. I'm not sure that's the entire path of it, but that's kind of like been my operating theory for the last couple of years, is that the only, whether you want to call that a faith side of things or maybe even a little bit of stoicism, the only thing I can control is how I behave and how I interact with others. And when I interact with my buddy who wants to just chug from the bullshit machine, the only way I can do is to try to say like, no, this is what reality is. This is what's important. Abuse is not acceptable. And by the way, I think you're better than this. And just hope that kind of goes through. And I don't know that I have to be very careful about I think you're better than this, because like that can come very preachy, but just more along the lines of like, hey, I love you, man, but like, I don't love this.
Yeah, I think that's really why. I mean, you start with the personal connection, and your instinct there to not be preachy, I think, is also right. That can come later, but it's got to be built on a foundation of like a productive conversation, I think.
Well, I think we've pulled that thread as far as it needs to go. I guess the truth of it is, though, is the truth is generally quieter than the carnival barker. It's quieter than you think. Yeah, so we're on to the section of the show here now where we talk about our goods, bads, and others. Neil, what's going on good in your world?
My good was I have a mountain of work to do. I'm in the middle of a fundraise and my inbox is deep. But I took yesterday to have a boys' day. I've got an 8-year-old and an 11-year-old, and yesterday was just a boys' day. We had pancakes in the morning. We went out in the backyard and played some, call it wiffle ball, stick ball. We went on a little walk. We came in and played some video games. We took a ride to get some food. I mean, it was just a day where I got to spend it with my boys, and it was amazing. It was just phenomenal. And, I'm even further deep in my inbox, but it was the right decision for sure. My bad. Yeah. My bad is that fundraising sucks. It always sucks. I think, I'll just say it this way. It is the most inefficient market I've ever come across, in the sense that, buyers can't find sellers. And what I mean by that is like investors can't find the startups. And I hear that all the time from my investor buddies. And similarly, like startups can't find the investors. And that means you end up doing a lot of email outreach, a lot of, Zoom, 30-minute Zoom calls to try to figure out if there's a fit. And you can figure it out pretty quickly, but it's just a really inefficient process. The good news is that it's going well. And I've found, I've had 150 or so email outreaches, and I've got, good traction, and it's going well. Better than I should be. I mean, it sounds like I'm complaining, and it's actually going really well, but, it's such a time suck, and it's just so inefficient.
Yeah, God. Yeah, my sympathies. I know that pain.
And my other is the Tillman thing I started with, which is, I start as a bit of a sort of skeptic. I really want this to work, because I think, our veterans transitioning is awful. We still have way too many suicides, way too many homeless, and, folks that are suffering from substance abuse. And, it just seems like there's got to be a better way. I'm just also really skeptical that we're going to get access to folks at the right time and be able to get their attention in the way that we want. And I'm reminding myself that my skepticism is probably healthy, and it's probably good that, I'm starting from a place where it's, I'm not just assuming it's going to be successful, because I'll probably build something better if we go that route. But, anyway, so it's my other, because I gotta we got to see. We see if we can build a coalition, see if we can get funding, see if we can get this thing off the ground.
Yeah, great hopes, but great logistical challenges associated with it. It could be amazing. I pray it works actually, because I know how hard that can be. For me, my good is I'm just starting to enjoy summer. Summer used to be my favorite season. It's been displaced a little bit, but for a couple of reasons I'll talk about in a minute. But it was just great sitting out on a summer evening with my family. I'm going to do it again. My wife and I are trying to figure out how to put together a backpacking trip here next month. We have some time to go do that. I think I'm going to go hiking in the flat tops. So I'm just enjoying summer. My other though is kind of the flip of it. Why I don't really enjoy summer as much as I used to is that it's just gotten too blasted hot. When Denver didn't used to get into the 90s every day, and now it does. And a summer day that's in the 80s versus a summer day in the 90s is a very different experience. For me, like it becomes unpleasant to be outside above 95, especially. And that's just happening a lot more. But it's not just like the summer getting too hot. It's like all the challenges to the environment, like the things that used to be beautiful about the summer of like how full of life it was. The birds flying around and, insects crawling. And that doesn't really seem to be happening anymore. Like even just the other day, we had a crow land in our yard. We ended up capturing it because it was in distress. And we think it had bird flu, avian flu, and it was dying of that. And so like all these challenges on the natural world that like are really starting to take away from my, I obviously care about it deeply. It's like kind of what I do for work, but also just like, I care about it from a personal standpoint of like, it's, we're losing some of the beauty in the world, some of the enjoyment of just being a human alive in the summer.
Yeah. So one option there, and not to make light of it, but I really do think that people are going to start migrating north. And my flippant comment there was going to be, we shouldn't be pissing off Canada at a time when real estate prices further north are going to be more important.
Yeah, we'll just have to get comfortable with the long winters in Winnipeg. So we got that going for us. And then the other that I'm kind of keeping an eye on, and it's connected to climate in the summer and the heat, is that the U.S. Interagency Fire Center, I can't remember what its new name in Boise, has moved us up to Fire Alert 4, which is to say that like it's a 1 to 5 scale. It's associated with wildfire. There's enough wildfires now where we're starting to have to kind of short resource certain fires. For example, when it gets to 5, there's going to have to start activating branches of the military. I know there's some folks down at Fort Carson that are getting trained up for being able to do fire reaction, et cetera. So, the military is kind of in high demand. We still have Marines deployed to Los Angeles, as absurd and as criminal as that is. But we have real problems that are coming up from not dealing with our climate, and it's associated with wildfire. So I'm keeping my fingers crossed. This is the big other. It's bordering on being a bad for me. Is the idea is like I hope that this summer's fire season doesn't explode, because we are not well positioned to be able to handle it.
Yeah, Yeah, fingers crossed that there's some mitigation here, because we're not in a good spot, man. Not at all.
Yeah. I think that's all the time we have, Neil. Do you want to go ahead and read us out?
Yeah, sure thing. That's it for this episode of Hardpoints. Thanks for listening and being a part of the conversation around energy, national security, and the startup world. If you found today's episode useful or thought-provoking, make sure to follow us wherever you get your podcasts. And if you're feeling generous, share it on social media or send it to someone who'd appreciate it. Thanks again for joining us. Hardpoints is produced by Jordan Garuso and brought to you by the Valor Media Network. We'll see you next week.
Peace.